I was sitting at my kitchen table with the treatment estimate face up when my father said, "We're not paying $85,000 to gamble on your son." The hospital letter lay between us. Bold print saying, "Due upon scheduling," the insurance pre-authorization clipped to the corner. I didn't flip the page or raise my voice. I just looked at the total, then at the folder of wedding invoices stacked under his elbow. All of them with my name on the payment line. "Say that again," I said. He leaned back like he was tired of repeating himself. "We are not draining everything we have, so you can chase some specialist in another city. The doctors already said it's uncertain. That's why they call it a treatment plan, not a guarantee," I said. "They gave me an estimate, not a lottery ticket." My mother sat to his right, hands folded on her lap. She kept her eyes on the table. "We just can't take on more debt, honey," she said softly. "You know what the mortgage is. You know what the line of credit payment is." I opened the wedding folder so the invoices fanned out. Venue, catering, florist. My name printed as the bill too on every one. "I know exactly what the mortgage is," I said. "I also know I wired the venue deposit, the catering balance, and the florist's rush fee out of my accounts. Not the rental building, not your home equity line. Me." Dad gave the invoices a quick glance, then shrugged. "We covered plenty. You think that wedding paid for itself? Where do you think those checks came from?" I slid a bank transfer receipt out from the back of the folder and set it next to his hand. "This one came from my savings," I said. $2,200 to hold the venue. Same day my paycheck hit. You told me you'd reimburse me from the rental reserves." He didn't pick it up. "We used the building to back the line," he said instead. "It all came out of the same pot in the end. Family money is family money." "That's interesting," I said. "Because when I ask you to help your grandson breathe, suddenly family money is off limits." My mother flinched like I had shouted, even though my voice stayed level. "Don't make it sound like we don't care about him," she said. "We raised you on that building. If we risk it and something happens, what do any of us have?" My phone buzzed against the table, the hospital's main number lighting up the screen. I turned it face down without answering. "That's the treatment coordinator," I said. "She needs to know by 5 o'clock if we can schedule. The estimate is due upon scheduling." Those exact words. Dad tapped the corner of the hospital letter with one finger. "And what do you expect us to do?" he said. "Pull $85,000 out of the air? We're not sitting on that kind of cash." I pointed at the invoices under his elbow. "No," I said. "You were sitting on it in this chair when we planned a 3-course dinner and open bar for 200 people. I have bank alerts for every time I transferred money to cover a vendor who couldn't wait until Friday." He shook his head. "A wedding is different. It was your sister's one big day. We helped you both in different ways." "You didn't help me," I said. "You handed me a stack of contracts and told me the building would make me whole once the refinance cleared." My mother looked up at that. "We said we'd do what we could," she said. "Things changed. Interest rates. The tenant who moved out. You know all that. I know you signed off on chair upgrades and a bigger floral arch after that tenant moved out," I said. "I have the florist's adjustment order. The total went up by almost what the hospital wants for the first week of his care." Dad's jaw tightened. "You're keeping score now?" "I'm keeping records," I said. "There's a difference." He laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "You sound like a lawyer." "I sound like a mother who read every clause on a treatment estimate," I said. "They listed what insurance pays. They listed what I pay. Patient responsibility." The phrase sat there between us, printed in bold on the page. My mother's gaze drifted over it and away again like she was afraid if she stared too long it would stick. "We're not co-signing anything," Dad said. "We're not putting the building at risk. End of discussion." "So you'll risk him instead," I said, still calm. "That's the choice." "That's not fair," Mom whispered. "What would be fair?" I asked. "Taking one of those catering invoices and scratching my name off so yours fits in the space?" She didn't answer. The only sound in the kitchen was the soft hiss of the oxygen machine from my son's room down the hall. I flipped the hospital letter toward them so the second page showed. The breakdown of charges, the insurance adjustment, the line at the bottom with the total in heavy print. "This number," I said, tapping it once, "is almost exactly what I sent out in vendor payments for your one big day." My father pushed his chair back a few inches. "We're not talking about this anymore," he said. "We're sorry he's sick, but we're not emptying our lives because you made promises you can't afford to keep." I looked at the stack of invoices. My promises, his words, my son's lungs. It was all on the same table, just filed under different headings. "We're not emptying your life," I said quietly. "We're talking about you investing in his." He stood up anyway. "We'll help how we can. he said. But not like this. Not with that kind of money. My mother rose with him, smoothing the front of her blouse like she was leaving a church meeting. Call the hospital back, she said. Ask about charity programs, payment plans. People do that all the time. They already offered a payment plan, I said. They also said they need a commitment before they reserve a spot. There are other kids on that list. Mom reached for her purse. We have to go, she said. Your sister needs us to look at tile samples this afternoon. Her contractor's on a schedule. Of course he was. Everyone was on a schedule. The venue, the florist, the specialist who could help my son if I could produce one number before 5 o'clock. They moved toward the door. Dad paused, hand on the knob. We love him, he said without turning around. Don't twist that. We just can't do everything. I know, I said. You already chose what you could do. He opened the door, and they left. The sound of it closing was softer than I expected. I sat there a long moment, looking at the hospital estimate and the 3-page catering invoice side by side. Numbers lined up in neat columns, my name printed on both. Then I picked up a pen, circled the words patient responsibility, and knew this time the accounting would not be just emotional. The circle around patient responsibility bled through the paper a little. A dark ring on a number everyone kept telling me was impossible. It was not the first time a deadline and a dollar amount had sat on this table with my name on it. I could still hear my sister's voice from that night, high and wet over the speaker. They're going to give it to another couple, she sobbed. They said if they don't get the deposit by noon tomorrow, it goes back on the list. I remember glancing at the clock over the stove. It was late enough that the apartment building across the street was mostly dark, only a few windows still lit. How much is the deposit? I asked. $2,200, she said immediately. She had it memorized. They want it as a card payment or a wire. Mom and Dad said they're not liquid this month. Not liquid, I repeated. Even then, that's what they said? They said everything is tied up in the rental and the line of credit, she said. They said after the refinance they'll be flush, but right now they can't just pull that kind of cash. I opened my banking app while she kept talking. My emergency savings balance sat there, a number that had once made me feel secure. I thought about Ethan asleep in the next room, his soft baby breathing, the way I had been so proud to build that cushion on my own. So what are you asking me? I said. There was a pause. I could almost picture her twisting the phone cord even though everyone used wireless now. Could you put it on your card? She whispered. Just so I don't lose the date? Dad said the building will cover it and he'll make you whole when the refi closes. When is the refi supposed to close? I asked. In a few weeks, she said quickly. He said by the end of the month at the latest. He promised. Of course he did. He was generous with promises. I'll cover it, I said finally. But I need the invoice tonight, and I'm paying it directly to the venue. I'm not handing anyone cash. Her breath whooshed out in relief. You're saving my life, she said. I swear, when Dad does the transfer, I'll make sure you get every cent back. The invoice hit my email 10 minutes later. I printed it on my little home printer, the paper curling slightly at the edges, and keyed in the card payment over the phone with the coordinator. When she read the total back to me, I repeated it and wrote $2,200 venue deposit at the top in my own handwriting. When we hung up, I 3-hole punched the invoice and slid it into a cheap blue binder I'd picked up from the drugstore for work receipts. The spine label still said, miscellaneous. I pulled it out and wrote one word in pen, wedding. The next morning, my father came by under the pretense of dropping off some hand-me-down tools for Ethan's future big kid projects. Really, he wanted to talk about the deposit. You didn't have to do that, he said, leaning against my counter like he had come straight from his rounds at the rental property. I was going to move money from the building reserves once the refinance clears. It's just timing. I wasn't going to let her lose the date because you're not liquid this month, I said, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. He smiled like I'd made a good joke. Yeah, she told you that, huh? Look, rates have been weird. The appraiser was late. It's all a domino effect. But don't worry, I will make you whole from the rental building reserve account. Those were your exact words to her? I asked. They're my words to you, he said. He held his phone up. I'll text it right now, so you don't have to take it on faith. He tapped out a message while I watched. I didn't stare at the numbers he mentioned for the loan. I watched his thumb as he wrote that once the refinance closed, he would transfer every cent I had fronted for the wedding, plus whatever Ethan needs down the line. My phone buzzed on the table a moment later. I looked at the message, then took a screenshot and printed it after he left. The black and white text slightly fuzzy but legible. That page went into the blue binder too. It was a small step from there to being the default payer for everything else. A week later, my sister called again, this time about a photographer who required a non-refundable retainer. "He's offering us a deal if we sign by Friday," she said. "He usually charges like $3,270 for a full package, but if we lock it in now." "I am not negotiating with a man who charges more than my car," I said, but I opened my laptop anyway. She sent the contract. The retainer alone was more than a month of daycare. Dad chimed in on the group chat with a thumbs up and a message about how this guy was an investment in memories. "Are Mom and Dad paying this one?" I asked her privately. "They will," she said. "Dad said just put it on your card and he'll reimburse it all in one go when the refinance hits. It's easier for him to move bigger chunks." Of course it was easier for him. It was always easier for him when I held the immediate risk. I paid the retainer. I printed the invoice. I added a line to a new spreadsheet. Date, vendor, amount, payment method. At the far right, I added a column and labeled it Dad Reimbursement. I left it blank. Dress alterations came next. It started as just a hem and became custom lacework and structural changes to support a bodice the designer kept calling ambitious. My sister forwarded me the estimate like it was a weather report. "They want half now," she said. "The seamstress only takes transfers, no cards. Dad said you could pay her from your account and he'll, do the thing," he said. "The thing he said," I repeated, staring at the number. $428.77 for the first round of stitching. "Does he ever say it to you? Or only through me?" She went quiet. "He's stressed," she said finally. "About the building. About the refinance. You know how he is." I did know. I transferred the money anyway, wrote the amount on my spreadsheet, and slid the seamstress's handwritten receipt into a plastic sleeve. By the time we hit the cake tasting and chair upgrades, it wasn't even a conversation anymore. The vendor would send an invoice. My sister would forward it. My parents would talk about cash flow, and I would move money from my savings or paycheck. At my kitchen table one Thursday night, a few months before the wedding, Dad stopped by again. He watched me type another amount into the spreadsheet while Ethan colored at the other end of the table. "You're on top of this," he said approvingly. "I knew you'd be the responsible one." "Being responsible and being the bank are two different things," I said without looking up. He waved that off. "Once the refi closes, we'll do one big transfer. Clean, simple. I'll sit down with you, we'll look at the accounts, and I'll move every dollar back where it belongs." "I said I'd take care of you and Ethan, didn't I?" "You did," I said. I highlighted a column of amounts on the screen, all my outflows. "I'm just making sure I know what every dollar is when that day comes." He grinned. "That's my girl. Make it easy for your old man." I watched him leave, then added another line to the spreadsheet, this one without a dollar sign. Under Dad Reimbursement, I typed the words from his text. "We'll settle up after the big day." By the week of the wedding, that was the only thing in that column, sitting there like a promise written on a napkin. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday night, early enough that the sky outside the venue windows was still streaked with light when everyone took their seats. My sister and her fiancé sat at the center of a long farmhouse table. My parents took the seats of honor beside them. I was all the way at the end, next to the DJ I had paid a $500 deposit to book. "Can I run the timeline by you?" he asked me quietly. "Not my father, not my sister. Your name's on the agreement." "Go ahead," I said. 7 o'clock first dance, 8 o'clock cake, bouquet toss near the end. He nodded and pointed to his notes. "I've got your card on file for the remaining balance. I'll bring you the slip before I pack up." I followed his glance down the table, to where my father was already on his second glass of red wine, laughing with my sister's future in-laws. "You can bring it to me," I said. "I'm the one who pays you." When it was time for speeches, Dad stood, tapping his fork against his glass until the room quieted. He cleared his throat and looked straight at my sister. "To my baby girl," he said, voice thick. "You are carrying the family name into the next generation. Your mother and I are so proud of the woman you've become, and we are honored we could do this for you." There was a murmur of awes and a clink of glassware. I watched my sister's eyes shine, watched her reach for his hand across the table. My cousin leaned toward me. "Your parents really went all out," she whispered. "This place is insane. That rentals building must be a gold mine." "Must be," I said. I folded my hands in my lap so she wouldn't see my nails digging into my own palm. Dad kept going, talking about sacrifice and hard work. "Everything we've built, we built for you kids," he said. "And now, seeing it pay for a night like this, it's worth every penny." I thought of my spreadsheet open on my laptop at home, I thought of the column of amounts with no matching entries under dad reimbursement. Every penny, I thought, had my name next to it. Near the end of the dinner, the venue manager appeared at the head table with a neat folder in her hands. She was polite, professional smile, hair pulled back. "Just a quick housekeeping item," she said. "This is the final catering invoice. It includes tonight and the bar package." She said it in front of my sister, because that's whose name was embroidered on the napkin. My sister flipped it open, frowned at the pages, then glanced immediately down the table at me. "Should I?" she started. Dad waved a hand. "Hand it to me," he said, but the manager was already looking my way. "Actually, our records show the primary contact and payer as..." She checked the top sheet. "You." She looked directly at me. "If we could settle this tonight, it keeps tomorrow clean and lets the kitchen close out." My sister turned her head. "Can you take care of it?" she called, as if we were talking about picking up ice instead of a bill for more than most people's annual income. I stood and walked the length of the table. The invoice was thick, 3 pages stapled together, each line item typed in neat black. I recognized every component per plate charges, bar minimum, service fee because I had watched them climb in real time. "What's the total?" I asked the manager, even though I could read. She told me. It was a little over $48,000. It was also, almost down to the 100, what I had once labeled house down payment, in a separate account. My father leaned in, cheeks flushed. "We'll sort it out after the refi," he murmured. "Just move it and keep everything smooth. This isn't the time." Of course it wasn't the time. It was never the time when people were watching. "Do you still need a bank wire?" I asked the manager. "Yes," she said. "If you authorize it tonight, it should clear by morning. We have the venue account details ready, and your name is already listed as the client of record." "My name," I repeated. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The account I had set aside for a different kind of future, the one with a small house and a yard where Ethan could run without gasping, stared back at me. Balance high enough to make this transaction possible, and low enough that it made my stomach lurch. "I'll call the bank's wire department," I said. "They'll ask me to confirm your account name and the last 2 words of the branch reference. Just stay close." We stepped aside to a quieter corner near the bar. I called, answered the security questions, and listened as the representative read the destination details out loud. I repeated them back, confirming the venue's name and the branch note with 90 at the end. When she read the amount, I said it too, steady, and authorized the transfer. "Once the wire posts," the representative said, "you'll see a pending debit. It should finalize by morning. Please email me a confirmation," I said, "to the address you have on file." When I hung up, the manager handed me a pen and pointed to a signature line at the bottom of the invoice. "Sign here to acknowledge payment is in process," she said. "Once we see the funds, we'll issue a zero balance statement." I signed, first and last name, clear and readable. Her copy went into her folder. Mine slid into a white envelope. Back in the main room, my mother was fussing over the floral arch mock-up, moving a spray of roses 2 inches to the left. "Can you believe how beautiful this is?" she said to a cluster of relatives. "The rentals building really came through for us." One aunt laughed. "You always said that property would take care of the kids." Mom nodded, proud. "It's all for them." I glanced at the unopened envelope in my hand, the one with my signature and my account on it. "Some of us more than others," I said under my breath. "What was that?" Mom asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just making sure everything is where it belongs." The DJ caught my eye and walked over with a small clipboard. "Balance on our agreement," he said quietly. "Same card as the deposit?" "Yes," I said. I signed his slip too. Another few hundred shaved off the top of an account that could not afford to be generous forever. The next night, during the reception, the venue manager found me near the back of the hall and handed me a single sheet of paper. "Wire received," she said. "Here is your zero balance due statement for catering and venue. You're all set." My name sat at the top again. Client, billing contact, responsible party. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my clutch behind my lipstick. Much later, when the last song ended and the kitchen lights flicked brighter, I waited until no one was looking, laid the signed catering receipt on an empty table, and took a quiet photo of it with my phone. At the bar, under the hum of the glass washer, I opened my email and sent myself a message with the photo attached, and the subject line, "Wedding catering paid in full." By the time my sister gathered her bridesmaids for the bouquet toss, my feet hurt and the room smelled like spilled champagne and wilting flowers. She stood in the center of the dance floor, veil pinned, dress altered, every piece of it funded and accounted for. "Ready?" she shouted. The DJ, the one I had booked and paid, counted down into his microphone. As she turned and flung the bouquet over her shoulder, my phone buzzed in my hand with a low balance alert from my bank, and I smiled like it was part of the show. The bouquet hadn't even landed before the alert lit up my screen. A neat little message telling me exactly how low my balance had dipped. I clicked it away, lifted my glass, and pretended that tight feeling in my chest was happiness for my sister and not the number I had just agreed to swallow. A few months later, I was sitting in a pulmonologist's office in a different kind of quiet, the kind that smelled like disinfectant and paper gowns. Ethan swung his legs from the exam table, the paper under him crackling every time he moved. The doctor sat on a rolling stool with a chart open on the screen. His voice was even, almost gentle. "We've exhausted the standard therapies," he said. "There is a specialized procedure and post-care program we can try. It's not experimental exactly, but it is advanced." "What does that mean in real numbers?" I asked. "What is my part?" He clicked through a few screens, then turned the monitor slightly so I could see. "After insurance," he said. "Your out-of-pocket estimate is around $85,000. That includes the procedure, the initial hospital stay, and the structured follow-up program for the first year." Ethan looked at me, then at him. "Is that bad?" he asked. "It's just a number," I said, even though it didn't feel like one. "We're talking about how to help you breathe better." The doctor nodded. "Our billing coordinator will go over options," he said. "But I have to be transparent with you. We have limited slots on the schedule, and we do require payment in full before we can lock in a date." In the billing office, a woman with a neat bun and a badge that said Financial Coordinator printed out a sheet with boxes and columns. She circled one line in blue ink, "Payment in full required prior to scheduling." Underneath, she underlined a note about high demand capacity, limited procedure slots. She slid the paper across the desk. "This is our policy," she said. "We can take a lump sum from a bank account, a certified cashier's check, or a combination if you're moving funds around. We've already processed the insurance pre-authorization, so we know what they'll cover. This is your portion." I stared at the circled number. It didn't look like it belonged in a medical office. It looked like something from a mortgage application. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. She glanced at her calendar. "We hold a tentative spot for a few days," she said. "Given his case, I can keep it open through Friday. If you can call before Friday, by the end of the day, we can convert that to a firm booking. If not, the slot goes to another patient on the list, and we look at the next available window." "Call before Friday," I repeated. She picked up a business card from a small holder and wrote something on the back. When she handed it to me, I saw the direct line and, underneath in her handwriting, "Ask for me. We'll need full payment to schedule." "I know this is a lot," she said, "but at least you're not going in blind. You know exactly what they'll pay and what you're responsible for." "Patient responsibility," I said, thinking of the phrase already printed on the estimate. "I'm getting familiar with that section." At home, I cleared the kitchen table like I was setting up for another planning meeting. On one side, I opened the blue wedding binder, thick with invoices and printed screenshots of outgoing transfers. On the other, I laid out the hospital folder, the pulmonologist's summary, the treatment plan, the estimate with its bold total. I ran my finger down the column of wedding payments: venue wire, catering wire, photographer, florist, DJ, dress alterations. Line after line, dates and amounts, all filed under a night where people clinked glasses and told my sister she was the luckiest woman alive. Then I looked at the hospital estimate again. The total at the bottom, my share, was almost exactly what I had once labeled as house down payment, before I drained it in installments for chair upgrades and bar packages. Ethan was in the living room, cartoons on low, his breathing just noisy enough that I could hear the difference when he laughed. I took a breath, picked up my phone, and scrolled to my father's name. He answered on the second ring. "Hey kiddo," he said. "What's up?" "I had an appointment at the hospital today," I said. "With the pulmonologist." "How'd it go?" he asked. His tone was casual, like he already had an exit ready. "They outlined a specialized procedure and a follow-up program," I said. "Insurance will cover part of it. My out-of-pocket is estimated at $85,000. They need payment in full before they'll schedule. I have until Friday to commit to the slot." There was a short silence. I could hear a television in the background, some home renovation show murmuring about backsplash choices. "That's a lot," he said finally. "We don't have that kind of capacity right now." "You had capacity for a $48,000 catering wire," I said. "You had capacity for deposits and retainers and upgrades." "I know, because I was the one who moved the money." "That was different," he said quickly. "We weren't maxed out then. The refinance didn't go the way we expected. The line of credit is stretched. We can't pull from the building again. The bank doesn't like it when you keep tapping the equity. So the rental building only funds celebrations, I said. It doesn't fund medical care. Don't put it like that, he snapped. It's not about what we care about more. It's about what's possible. Right now we are maxed out. Credit cards, the line, everything. We just approved the granite for your sister's kitchen. That's locked in. We can't undo that. I closed my eyes. You approved granite, I said slowly, while I was at the hospital talking about his lungs. It was a timing thing, he said. Her contractor needed an answer. We've been planning that remodel for months. You know how long she's waited. She waited for countertops, I said. He's waiting to breathe. That's not fair, Dad said. You're making it sound like we chose stone over him. You did, I said, my voice still low. You chose where to send the money. You chose more than once. He let out a long breath. Look, we can't produce $85,000 by Friday, he said. We just don't have it. You'll have to ask the hospital about charity funds, payment plans, whatever. We'll help where we can later. Maybe we can cover some co-pays down the line. Down the line, I repeated. They don't schedule down the line. They schedule based on who can pay now. I'm sorry, he said. But it sounded like something he said when a game was rained out. I wish things were different. Me too, I said. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound on his end, the murmur of the renovation show host talking about return on investment. I have to go, I said. Thank you for being honest. That's all we can do, he said. Be honest about what we can't do. When the call disconnected, I stared at the little call-ended screen until it faded. Then I opened our text thread. His messages about the wedding were still there, the one promising to make me whole from the rental reserves, the one about transferring every cent I'd fronted, plus whatever Ethan needs. I scrolled down to the new messages from that day, the ones about being maxed out, about granite, about no capacity for $85,000 by Friday. I sent myself screenshots to my email, then printed the entire thread, old promises and new refusals, onto a few curling pages. The ink was a little light near the margins, but every word was readable. I took a fresh page protector from the box, slid the treatment estimate into it, then added the printed messages behind it like a backing sheet. I pressed the plastic closed until it snapped. I hung up, printed our text thread, and slid it into the same page protector as the treatment estimate. The snap of the plastic was still echoing in my head when my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my mother. We're coming by tomorrow to talk about options. They showed up the next afternoon, right after Ethan's nap. The oxygen machine in his room hummed like a small engine, a steady background noise I had stopped hearing until I saw my mother's face tighten at the sound. Is he sleeping? She whispered as they stepped inside. Yes, I said. He had a rough morning. Keep your voices normal. He can sleep through anything except whispers. They sat at the kitchen table like they were there for coffee, not triage. I set the hospital folder down between us, the wedding binder beside it. The business card from the billing coordinator lay on top, her note about calling before Friday still visible. My father glanced at the card and then away. We wanted to talk about options, he said. You sounded very worked up on the phone. I sounded like a mother who was told she needs $85,000 paid in full by Friday to schedule a procedure, I said. That is not being worked up. That is repeating terms. Mom folded her hands. We know it's a lot, she said. We didn't sleep last night thinking about it. Dad tapped the cover of the blue wedding binder with 2 fingers. We've already given so much, he said. You know that. This, he tapped again, is proof. We can't risk the rental building or the line of credit for something the doctor himself called uncertain. It sounds like experimental medicine. It is not experimental, I said. He was clear about that. It is specialized and advanced, and it has a price tag to match. He shrugged. Whatever the word is, it's a gamble. We already stretched ourselves helping with the wedding. There's nothing left to pull from. I opened the binder and flipped to the first page where I had taped the printed wire confirmation to the venue. This one, I said, tapping the top. Catering and venue wire, over $48,000. From an account that was supposed to be my house down payment. That was not you stretching yourselves. That was me. Mom winced. You know the building is behind that, she said. We never asked you to do more than you could. You asked me to pay and promised to reimburse me from the rental reserves, I said. I reached into the plastic sleeve and pulled out the printed screenshot of my father's text. Here, this is your message. You said you would make me whole from the building's reserve account and transfer every cent I had fronted, plus whatever Ethan needs. Dad took the paper, glanced at it, and set it back down like it was a grocery list. That's family talk, he said. Not a contract. I was reassuring you. Things change. Family talk, I repeated. You wrote whatever Ethan needs. Not whatever the wedding needs, not whatever Granite needs. Him. He spread his hands. And we helped you when he was a baby, did we not? We watched him. We bought things. You helped as grandparents, I said. This is different. This is me asking you to honor a written promise tied to a property you keep calling for us kids. He shook his head. You're twisting it into something legal. We were talking as a family. You can't come back now and treat it like a loan agreement or a contract. There's no paperwork, no signatures, just a message. There is paperwork, I said quietly. You just never expected me to read it. He frowned. What paperwork? I did not answer that yet. Instead, I slid the hospital estimate toward him. This is what I owe, I said. The coordinator circled the line that says payment in full required prior to scheduling. She underlined that they have limited slots. I have until Friday to call her and say yes or no. I am asking you, as the people who promised whatever Ethan needs, to help me say yes. Mom looked at the number and blinked. We cannot, she said. We simply cannot. The rental's line of credit is nearly maxed. We just approved the Granite for the kitchen. If we go back to the bank now asking for more, they will think we are irresponsible. So you would rather they think of you as responsible homeowners with nice countertops, I said, than as grandparents who helped fund their grandson's treatment. That is not what this is, Dad said sharply. You are trying to make us into villains. We have to protect what we have built. If we lose the building, everybody loses. You, your sister, your son down the line. Do you understand that? I understand math, I said. I understand that you chose where the money went, and now you're telling me the tank is empty. Mom reached across the table, palm up. We can't do $85,000 by Friday, she said. But maybe we could help with small amounts later. Maybe a few hundred a month toward follow-up bills. When things calm down. We can't mortgage our future on something that might not work. You already mortgaged my future house on a wedding that definitely ended, I said. And you called it love. Dad pushed back his chair. If you're going to talk to us like this, there's nothing more to say, he said. We came here to see how we could support you emotionally. We cannot save you financially from every problem. I didn't ask you to save me, I said. I asked you to help save him. He stood. Mom followed, smoothing her shirt like she always did when she was uncomfortable. We will pray, she said. We will ask God to open a door. But this is not something we can fix with money right now. I thought of the wire confirmation taped in the binder, the one that had, paid in full, written next to a number big enough to fix a lot of things. Money fixed a lot of things for my sister, I said. You just told me it stopped at her kitchen island. Mom flinched. Dad stared at me, eyes flat. You're being cruel, he said. No, I said. I'm being accurate. They left without hugging me, backing out of the apartment like they were leaving a disappointing open house. The door closed softly behind them. For a long time, I sat at the table, listening to the oxygen machine hum from Ethan's room, looking at the two stacks in front of me, a binder that meant nothing to them now except stories, and a folder that meant everything to me and apparently nothing to them at all. Finally, I stood and went to the hall closet where I kept my file box. Taxes, old leases, school paperwork, anything I had promised myself I would figure out someday. I flipped through the hanging folders until my fingers hit an old manila envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. My name, underneath it one phrase, rental house papers. I had almost forgotten about it. She had handed it to me years before in their kitchen, sliding it across the counter like a spare set of keys. This is just in case something happens to us, she had said then. You're on the deed with us now. It's all for you kids anyway. Back then, I had tucked it into my file box without opening it. I didn't need another thing to worry about. I trusted their version of what "for you kids" meant. Now I carried the envelope back to the table, set it down next to the hospital folder, and peeled the metal clasp open. Inside was a thick document with a county seal at the top and the words "Grant Deed" printed in clear type. I read the names on the front. My parents, as grantors. My name, alongside theirs, as a grantee. The property's address. A note that it had been recorded at the county recorder's office on a date that meant nothing to me then and everything now. My eyes moved to the notary block, the little square where a stranger had once watched them sign on my behalf and stamped that it was real. I turned the pages, skimming over the legal description, the lot and block tract language that had always sounded like another language. This time, I did not let my eyes slide off the words. I read them slowly, one line at a time, until they stopped feeling decorative and started feeling like instructions. That night, I read every line on that deed until the legal description felt less like Latin and more like a map out of this corner. By the next morning, the grant deed was still on the table, edges curled slightly where I'd pressed my fingers into it. I made myself a cup of coffee I barely tasted, propped my phone against the sugar jar, and searched for someone whose job was to make sense of words like grantee and consideration and subject to matters of record. I found a small firm that handled real estate and probate, a couple of blocks from the county courthouse, upstairs from a coffee shop I already knew for its burnt muffins. The receptionist offered me a slot on Tuesday at 10 a.m. "Bring any documents you have," she said. "Deeds, emails, anything in writing about the property or your arrangement." "My arrangement," I repeated. "Okay." On Tuesday morning, I left Ethan with a trusted neighbor and walked into the coffee shop with the blue binder under one arm and the grant deed in a clear plastic sleeve. The smell of espresso and sugar hit me first. Upstairs, in the narrow hallway, it shifted to toner and old carpet. The attorney's office was small, just 2 chairs, a desk scarred at the edges, shelves with binders, and a framed map of the county pinned above them. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes and a tie that had been loosened before I even sat down. "I'm Mark," he said, standing to shake my hand. "You must be—" I gave him my name. "Thank you for seeing me," I said. "I'm not even sure what I'm asking for yet." "That's all right," he said. "Why don't you start at the beginning? Tell me what brought you here, and we'll see if there's a legal shape to it." So I laid it out, not in speeches but in dates and transactions. The $2,200 venue deposit when my parents were not liquid, the photographer retainer, the dress alterations, the $48,000 wire from the account that used to be my house fund. "The wedding binder is thorough," he said when I slid it across his desk. "You kept all of this in real time?" "Yes," I said. "I thought I was being organized. I didn't know I was building a case file." He opened the grant deed next, smoothing it flat. "And this was given to you when?" "A few years ago," I said. "My mother said it made me an owner, just in case something happens to us. I didn't read it then. I read it this week." He traced a line with his finger. "Your parents as grantors," he said. "You and them as grantees. Joint ownership. That means you have an interest in the property. Not someday. Now." "An interest?" I said. "Like, on paper, or in real life?" "Both," he said. "On paper is real life and property law. Do you receive any of the rent?" I shook my head. "No, they collect it. They pay the mortgage and taxes. They call it their building, but they also call it our inheritance. When they needed leverage for the refinance, they reminded me I was on the deed. When I needed money for my son, suddenly I'm just a kid asking her parents for too much." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Did they ever provide you with an accounting? Rent collected, expenses paid, distributions owed?" "No," I said. "Just commentary. The building came through for the wedding. We used the building to back the line of credit. Things like that." "And your son's situation?" he asked gently. I slid the hospital estimate across next, the page protector still stiff from where I'd snapped it shut. "Pulmonologist's office," I said. "Specialized procedure. Out-of-pocket estimate of $85,000 after insurance. Payment in full required prior to scheduling. I have a few days each time they offer a slot. They called last week." I called my father. He said they had no capacity to help. He read the circled number, then the handwritten, "Call before Friday," on the coordinator's card. And how did he phrase his refusal? I pulled out the printed text thread and flipped to the page I'd already read too many times. He said the line of credit is maxed, the cards are stretched, he can't pull from the building again, and they just approved granite for my sister's kitchen. He told me to ask the hospital about charity funds and payment plans. "Did you bring any of what you mentioned on the phone?" he asked. "Messages where he talked about reimbursing you from the property?" I opened a different sleeve and slid out the screenshot of his earlier promise. The one where he said he'd make me whole from the building's reserve account and transfer every cent I'd fronted, plus whatever Ethan needs. He read it, twice. "And this?" he asked, holding up a printed screenshot of a group chat message from my mother where she called the rental building "your inheritance," while reassuring me about my financial future. "She sent that when I was working weekends," I said. "I was worried about saving. She told me not to stress about retirement because the building would take care of us." He set the pages down and tapped them into a neat pile. "Okay," he said. "Here's the simple version. As a co-owner of this rental property, you are entitled to your share of its income. and to have it managed in a way that doesn't unfairly benefit one owner at the expense of another. Which is legal speak for, I asked. For your father using the building and related credit to fund one daughter's wedding, while denying any assistance for a grandchild's legitimate medical need, he said. That can look like mismanagement. Possibly breach of his duties to you as a co-owner, depending on how it's structured. Mismanagement, I repeated. The word felt oddly clean. So what does someone do about that, besides argue in kitchens? He pulled a legal pad in front of him and wrote a word at the top in block letters, then turned it so I could read it. One option, he said, is to ask the court to appoint a receiver. I looked at the word, receiver. Like in football? He smiled, briefly. Similar idea. A receiver is a neutral person, usually a professional, appointed by a judge to step in and take control of a specific asset, in this case, your rental building. They collect the rent. They pay the mortgage, taxes, insurance. They account for every dollar. They do not play favorites between owners. They follow the court's instructions, not family pressure. And my father loses day-to-day control over that property, he said. At least for as long as the receivership is in place. He doesn't get to move money out for weddings or kitchen remodels without oversight. If there is income that should be going to you, the receiver can hold it in a separate account or distribute it according to the court's order. Could they direct money to the hospital? I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. If we can show that you have an urgent, documented need tied to your share, he said, nodding at the estimate, we can ask the court to allow the receiver to apply some of your portion toward medical expenses. I can't promise how a judge will rule, but we can make the request. What we can almost certainly do is stop the current pattern, your father treating the building as his personal wallet, while you get nothing. This wouldn't pay by Friday, I said. The coordinator needs an answer by Friday. No, he said honestly. The law moves slower than that. This is about the long-term pattern and about making sure your son's life isn't permanently at the mercy of your father's choices. In the short term, we can talk about negotiating with the hospital, maybe getting a brief extension if they know you're pursuing a structured solution. But the receivership, if granted, would change who holds the faucet on the building. I looked down at the word on his pad again. Receiver. A person whose job it was to receive what should have been mine all along, and to redirect it where it was supposed to go. What does it take to ask for that? I said. We would file a petition in the trial court, he said. We attach the grant deed, your documentation of how the property has been managed, your father's messages about using the building for the wedding and refusing to use it for your son, your mother's inheritance comments. We argue that there is mismanagement and that your interest is at risk. We ask for the appointment of a receiver and for an accounting of past income. And my parents would be served with the papers, he said. Formally notified. They would have a chance to respond. There would be a hearing. This is not a small step. Judges do not appoint receivers lightly. But the facts you've shown me are not nothing. I thought of my father tapping the wedding binder like it was proof of his generosity, telling me his text was just family talk, not a contract. I thought of my mother calling the building my inheritance when she needed me to stop worrying, then calling it off limits when I asked for help. How much do you charge to do that? I asked. He didn't flinch. For a matter like this, I work on a flat retainer, he said. $5,000 to get the petition drafted, filed, and through the first hearing. If it goes beyond that, we'll talk. But that gets you in front of a judge with something more than a story. $5,000. In wedding terms, less than the cake and the DJ combined. In hospital terms, a small chip out of $85,000. In legal terms, the price of moving this out of my parents' living room and into a courtroom. Can I use a card? I asked. Or does it have to be a check? Card is fine, he said. We'll send you a written retainer agreement with the terms. You review, sign, and we proceed. If you decide not to, that's your call. I don't pressure clients. But you are a co-owner on that deed. You do not have to stay in this pattern. He slid the grant deed back toward me, tapping my name where it sat next to my parents. This is not decorative, he said. This is enforceable. The law sees you, even if they pretend not to. I picked up the deed, feeling the weight of the paper more than I had at my own kitchen table. If we do this, I said, I don't want to do it to punish them. I want to do it so my son's life is not decided at their convenience. That's a good reason, he said. Courts understand urgent medical needs. They also understand numbers, and you have both. The retainer agreement arrived in my email that afternoon. I read it slowly in my quiet kitchen, Ethan coloring at the table, the oxygen machine humming its familiar note. The terms were clear. What he would do, what it would cost, what I was asking him to file in my name. When I signed his retainer agreement, my hand was steady. I finally had a word for what I was going to do besides beg. Once I had a word for what I was doing, my brain snapped back into a mode it already knew: planning. Only this time, I wasn't matching napkin colors to chair sashes. I was lining up emails and documents so a judge could follow a trail my parents had always assumed would stay in the dark. Over the next few weeks, I gathered evidence with the same precision I had once used for the seating chart. I started with my inbox, typing the rental building's address into the search bar. Rent roll summaries my father had forwarded for fun popped up mass emails with subject lines about great occupancy and solid cash flow. Little smiley faces sprinkled in. I printed each one, even the ones that only showed monthly totals and a note about net positive after mortgage and taxes. Then I searched our family group chat backups. There it was, a screenshot he had posted months before the wedding of a rent deposit notification, followed by his own message: "Love when the building pulls through. This one's going straight to the wedding fund." I printed that too, the brag sitting right under a picture of my sister holding a cake sample. I forwarded everything to Mark with short notes. Here is the group chat message where he says he's pulling from the building for the wedding. Here are the rent roll emails he used to show off our success. At his office one morning, Mark had a new stack on his desk. "The county recorder came through," he said, tapping a set of pages with a fresh stamp on top. "Certified copy of the deed, with recording information and notary acknowledgement. No one can say this is some half-baked piece of paper you cooked up at home." He flipped the deed so I could see the seal. "This, plus your original, plus the text messages and the group chat brag, it paints a picture," he said. "We're almost ready to file the petition." "What else do you need?" I asked. "A bit more context on the line of credit," he said. "You mentioned your father talking about it being maxed out and tapped for the wedding." I nodded. "He sent me a landlord notice once, asking me to proofread it," I said. "It mentioned improvements on the property as justification for a rent increase, but he used that same week to approve granite for my sister's kitchen. I'll find it." At home that afternoon, I dug through another folder and found the notice. A letter to tenants about necessary upgrades and rising costs, signed by my father as landlord, citing recent investments in the property. I printed it and highlighted the date, then dug up the text where he told my sister, in the same week, that the building got you your dream counters. When I brought those back to Mark, he added them to a growing binder. "This is helpful," he said. "Judges like contemporaneous writings. It shows where the money actually went while he was claiming it was needed for the building." On a Tuesday morning, he called. "I'm filing the petition electronically today," he said. "Mismanagement, breach of duty, request for appointment of receiver and accounting. I'll copy you on the confirmation from the court once it's received." I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, email refreshed so many times the screen blurred. Ethan colored at the other end, humming along with a show playing low on the television. The oxygen machine ticked and sighed in its steady rhythm. At mid-morning, a new message popped up. "Court filing system. Petition received." There was no fanfare, just a timestamp and a note that a case number had been assigned, but my shoulders dropped an inch. "Paperwork is in," Mark texted right after. "Next step is service on your parents. We also need to put the line of credit bank on notice." He drafted a letter to the bank that afternoon. In simple language, it explained that there was an ownership dispute involving the rental property, attached a copy of the deed listing me as co-owner, and requested that the bank flag any new draws on the line of credit tied to that property. "We're not freezing their entire financial life," he said when we reviewed it in his office. "We're asking the bank to be cautious about allowing more debt against an asset that's now squarely in front of the court." "Will the bank actually care?" I asked. "They care about anything that might complicate their collateral," he said. "We're giving them a heads up. If your father tries to pull more money out against the building now, he is going to run into questions." He handed me a copy of the letter and the certified mail receipt clipped to it. "This went out this morning," he said. "You'll want to keep this. If your parents come to you with some story about the bank turning against them, you can say, calmly, that the bank is simply responding to formal notice." "And what am I supposed to say when they ask why I'm doing this?" I asked. He slid a sticky note across the desk. On it, in his neat handwriting, was a short script. "You can say, 'I am a co-owner protecting my share. The court will decide what is fair. This is not personal. This is about proper management and my son's medical needs.' Then stop talking." "Just that?" "Just that," he said. "You're not on trial in your parents' living room. You've chosen a different forum." While he handled the bank and the court, I went back to the hospital. Sitting in the billing coordinator's office again, I laid the same estimate on the desk, the circled number no less obscene than before. I don't have the full $85,000 yet, I said. But I've engaged an attorney to address mismanaged assets that were supposed to be available for my son. We've filed in court. I need to know if there is anything you can do on timing. She studied my face for a moment, then pulled up my file. We can't schedule without a plan, she said. But we can start some of the pre-procedure tests if you can commit to a smaller initial amount and a short-term payment arrangement while you work on the rest. How smaller? I asked. She wrote a number on a sticky note, still a lot, but not as crushing as the full amount. If you can put this down by the end of next week and sign a temporary payment plan, we can get his scans and labs started, she said. It buys you some time. Not months, but weeks. I swallowed. I had just enough open credit left on one card to cover it if I was careful. I can do that, I said. They drafted the plan while I waited. Monthly installments for 3 months. Review at the end. I signed where she pointed, making sure the language said temporary arrangement, and referenced the full estimate as still outstanding. We'll mark his file as active, payment in progress, she said. That keeps him in our system while you sort out the big picture. The big picture, now, included a court date in the not-too-distant future, and a stranger at the bank opening a certified letter with my name next to my parents on the deed. All that was left was to put the petition in my parents' hands. Mark hired a process server, someone who, unlike me, would not flinch when my father opened the door. He texted me the morning it was scheduled. Server has the packet. Will update when served. I stared at the message, phone in my palm, the kitchen filled with early light. A few minutes later, my screen lit up again with a different number. The morning the process server texted that he was en route to my parents' house. Dad called me, cheerful, about a small insurance issue he wanted me to handle for the building. Small insurance issue, he said, like he was asking me to pick up milk. The carrier sent something weird about the rental. Can you call and straighten it out? You're better at that stuff. I looked at the text from the process server at the top of my screen. En route, and then back at his name, glowing over the call button. Forward me whatever they sent, I said. I'll take a look. He did. An email about proof of repairs and updated photos. I opened it, scanned for anything urgent, and told him calmly, they just want documentation that the property is being maintained. You can reply with the last inspection report and a note about the roof work. If you want, I can draft a response. You're a lifesaver, he said. I knew you'd handle it. The building is a lot to keep up with. I know, I said. I've noticed. We hung up. A little while later, my phone buzzed again, this time from the process server. Served at front door, his message read. Papers accepted. Husband present. I stared at that line for a long second. At the bottom was a timestamp, a little before noon. I texted Mark. Got confirmation. He replied. Good. We wait for the reaction. Remember your script. It took less than an hour. My father's name lit up my screen. Once, twice. I let it go to voicemail. Then the messages started. What is this? Came first. Then, you're suing your own family? Another, a receiver? Over our building? Are you out of your mind? By the time I finished making Ethan a sandwich, the entire screen was a stack of accusations. Ungrateful, influenced by some lawyer who wants your money. You will destroy everything for all of us over one bill. I set the phone face down on the counter and breathed. The oxygen machine in the next room pulsed in its steady rhythm, answering him better than I could. Mark called later that afternoon. He's seen it, I said by way of greeting. I gathered, he said. Remember, you do not argue the petition by text. If he wants to talk, you say the line we rehearsed and get off the phone. What if he shows up? I asked. Same line, he said. This is not personal. This is about proper management and your son's medical needs. If he gets loud, you step away. You're not the referee. By early evening, I was at the hospital with Ethan for more pre-procedure tests. The billing coordinator's temporary plan had bought us a small opening. They were running imaging and labs while we inched our way toward the $85,000 total. On the pediatrics floor, the family lounge was a small rectangle of chairs, an empty coffee pot, and outdated magazines. I sat there with my laptop open, reviewing Mark's draft of an updated budget, while Ethan was down the hall getting an echocardiogram. It was around 6:30. The hallway lights had that dimmed, stretched feeling that made time weird. My phone was on the small table in front of me, screen dark. When it lit, I expected a nurse. Instead, it was my father again. I watched it ring out. Seconds later, the elevator bell dinged down the hall. A familiar voice cut through the low murmur of the television. Where is she? He was asking someone at the nurse's station. I closed my eyes for one beat, then looked up as he came into the lounge, holding a sheaf of papers in one hand like a flag. The stamped copy of our petition was visible on top. "What is this?" he demanded, not caring that there were two other families in the room, one woman clutching a styrofoam cup, another man staring at the muted news. "What do you think you're doing?" I kept my voice low. "You need to lower your voice," I said. "This is a hospital." He slapped the papers down on the coffee table in front of me. "You filed in court," he said. "Against your own father, against your own mother, asking some stranger to take over our property, over money." "It's not some stranger," I said. "It's a receiver. And it's not over money. It's over how you've handled money that belongs to all of us." He laughed, short and ugly. "A receiver," he repeated. "Do you even know what that means? Or did your lawyer just teach you a new word so he can charge you $300 an hour to ruin your family?" I glanced at the papers, at the case caption, with all our names in neat black type. "It means," I said, still quietly, "that a neutral person would step in and manage the rental building. They would collect the rent, pay the mortgage and taxes, and account for my share. You would not be able to use it for weddings and kitchen remodels while telling me there's nothing left for your grandson's treatment." He took a step closer. "You are destroying everything we built," he hissed. "Over one hospital bill. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? Do you think a judge is going to side with a girl who's mad about not getting granite when her sister did?" "I did not ask you for granite," I said. "I asked you for help with $85,000 to fund a medically recommended procedure." "You're taking it out on the building," he said. "On us. On your sister. Do you know what happens if a receiver takes over? Do you know how that looks? To banks? To tenants? You are hanging us out to dry." I reached into my bag and pulled out two things: a printed copy of my wedding spreadsheet and the hospital estimate in its page protector. I laid them side by side on the coffee table, pushing his crumpled petition copy aside an inch so they were clearly visible. "This," I said, tapping the spreadsheet, "is what I paid out for your other daughter's one-day event. Venue wire, catering wire, deposits, retainer, DJ, dress alterations. Tens of thousands of dollars, tracked by date and vendor." He glanced down at the columns. I watched his eyes flit past the totals. "And this," I said, tapping the hospital estimate, "is what I am being asked to pay for your grandson's procedure and first year of follow-up care. The number at the bottom is almost the same." He shook his head. "We didn't force you to pay for the wedding," he said. "You offered. You wanted to help. Now you're turning around and acting like we stole from you." "You promised to reimburse me from the rental reserves," I said. "You wrote that you would transfer every cent I fronted, plus whatever Ethan needs. When I asked you to honor that, you told me the building was maxed out, and you had no capacity while approving stone for a kitchen island." He jabbed a finger at the hospital estimate. "This is gambling," he said. "Throwing good money after bad odds. You could bankrupt all of us chasing something that might not even work." Behind him, a nurse walked past the lounge entrance, slowing just enough to see if she needed to intervene. I gave her a small shake of my head. I was not going to be the one escorted out. "This is not a gamble," I said. "It's a recommended course of care. The risk is not financial ruin. The risk is my son's lungs getting worse while you renovate a backsplash." "You filed court papers," he said again, as if that were the only crime. "You dragged our name into a courtroom. Over money." I looked down at the two stacks on the table. His celebration, my crisis. My voice stayed level. "I didn't drag our name anywhere," I said. "You put it on a deed with mine and then behaved like it was yours alone. I am asking the court to do what you wouldn't. Protect my share and make sure it goes where it was always supposed to go when I needed it." "You could have come to me," he said, voice rising. "I did," I said. "At this same table, with this same estimate. You said no." The woman with the styrofoam cup had stopped pretending not to listen. The man with the news on mute stared openly now. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. My father opened his mouth to say something else about me, destroying everything over money, about me being ungrateful, about family business not belonging in court. I let him get as far as destroying everything before I cut in, because I knew if I didn't, he would just keep piling words on top of each other until we were both buried. "I didn't file because of the wedding," I said. "I filed because of the pattern. Because you used shared income to pay for one night in a ballroom and then told me there was nothing left to help your grandson get a chance at breathing without a machine." He stared at me, breathing hard. The room went quiet when I said, "I asked you to help save his life, not buy him a dance floor." He did not have an answer for that. His mouth opened and closed once, then he shoved the papers back into his arm and stalked out of the lounge without another word. leaving my spreadsheet and the hospital estimate on the table like exhibits in a case only one of us had agreed to try. By the time the hearing date arrived, those same pages were hole-punched into a different binder, and I was standing in a courthouse hallway that smelled like dust and coffee. The clock over the elevator said a little past 9. Our matter was on the 10 o'clock calendar. Mark stood next to me, calm in a suit that had seen a lot of mornings like this. He had our binder in one hand and a legal pad in the other. "Walk me through it one more time," I said. My voice sounded steady, which I took as a good sign. He nodded. "First, the judge will decide whether to issue any temporary relief," he said. "That usually means an order not to move money out of the rental or take on new debt tied to it without permission. Then we argue for the appointment of a receiver." "And that's where you explain mismanagement," I said. "That's where I explain mismanagement," he agreed. "We have the deed, the rent emails, the group chat where your father brags about the building, funding the party of the year, your spreadsheet, the hospital estimate, and the promises about whatever Ethan needs." "What do I do?" I asked. "You sit next to me," he said. "You listen. If the judge asks you a direct question, you answer honestly and briefly. You're not here to tell your whole life story. You're here as a co-owner, whose share has been treated like a piggy bank for everyone but you." Down the hall, my parents arrived with their lawyer. My mother looked smaller than I remembered in a dark jacket. My father looked exactly the same, except for the stiffness in his shoulders. He did not look at me. Their attorney, an older man with a precise haircut, glanced over and then pretended he did not see us. He held a slim folder, as if the matter between us could be contained in that little space. When the clerk opened the courtroom doors and called our case, my stomach flipped, but my feet moved. I sat at counsel table next to Mark, facing the judge's bench, facing the seal and the flags and the place where decisions get written down in ways people have to obey. The judge, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and reading glasses on a chain, looked over the file before her. "This is a petition for appointment of receiver over a rental property," she said. "Petitioner alleges mismanagement by co-owners. Respondents oppose. I've read the papers. Counsel, I'll hear from petitioner first." Mark stood. His voice in that room was different from the one in his office, formal, measured, but still mine. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a fight about taste or hurt feelings. It is about a co-owner whose interest in a rental property has been systematically ignored, while the primary managing co-owner has used rental income and related credit to fund purely discretionary expenses for one child, including a wedding, and has expressly refused to use those same sources to assist with another child's extraordinary medical expenses." He opened our binder and laid out the first exhibit, the certified copy of the grant deed, my name printed alongside my parents'. "This deed," he said, "recorded with the county, establishes my client as a current co-owner of the property. She is not a future heir. She is a present owner." Next, he placed the wedding invoices on the document stand, flipping to the page that showed the $48,000 catering wire with my name as the payer. "These invoices show tens of thousands of dollars paid out for a one-day event," he said. "We also have bank confirmations for large transfers from accounts my client had set aside as a house down payment. Respondent father represented, in writing, that he would reimburse her from the rental reserves." He put the group chat printout in front of the judge, the line highlighted where my father had written about the building funding the party of the year. He was not shy about identifying the source, Mark said. When my client later requested assistance from those same funds for her son's medically recommended procedure, with an out-of-pocket estimate of $85,000 after insurance, he refused. He told her the building was maxed out, and in the same breath referenced granite countertops for the other daughter's kitchen. The judge's mouth tightened. "And you have documentation of the medical need?" she asked. "We do, Your Honor." He handed up the hospital's estimate with the circled total and the coordinator's note about payment in full prior to scheduling. "My client has already negotiated a temporary payment plan to begin pre-procedure tests. But the larger sum remains, and her co-owner's pattern of using joint assets for discretionary spending while denying her any share creates a risk that her interest will be irreparably harmed." My father's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is, at most, a family dispute blown out of proportion," he said. "Parents help one child with a wedding, another with childcare, perhaps more informally. There was never a contract, never a partnership agreement. All of this was informal family help, not mismanagement. Appointing a receiver over a family-owned rental based on these grievances would be extreme." The judge looked at him over her glasses. "Informal family help often stays informal until someone feels they are not being treated fairly," she said. "But once you put someone on a deed, you move out of the purely informal realm." She turned to my father. "Sir, please stand." He did, shooting me a quick glare before facing the bench. "Do you dispute that your daughter is a co-owner on the recorded deed for this property?" the judge asked. He shifted. "No, Your Honor," he said. "We put her on there for estate planning. It was always meant to be her inheritance someday." "Someday or not, she is on the deed now," the judge said. "Do you provide her with regular accountings of rent collected, expenses paid, and profits or losses?" He swallowed. "No, Your Honor. We just handle it. We've always paid the mortgage, the taxes. We reinvest in the property." "Did you use rental income or the property's line of credit to pay for your other daughter's wedding?" she asked. His lawyer started to object, but she held up a hand. "Answer the question," she said. He hesitated. "Some," he admitted. "We covered some things from the building. That's what it's for. For the family." "For the family," she repeated. "Including this petitioner?" He faltered. "We helped her in other ways," he said. "We watched her son. We bought things when he was little." "That was not my question," the judge said. "Do you have any written agreement with your co-owner here authorizing you to spend rental income or draw on credit secured by this property for a wedding, instead of holding or distributing her share or addressing her documented medical needs?" He looked at his lawyer, who looked at his papers. "No, Your Honor," he said finally. "We didn't write that down." The judge sat back. For a moment, the only sounds were the click of someone's pen and the soft murmur of another case being whispered at the back. "All right," she said. "I agree that the appointment of a receiver is a significant remedy. It takes control out of the hands of the current manager and places it with an officer of this court. I do not do that lightly. But here, we have a co-owner with no access to information, no distributions, and clear evidence that the managing co-owner has treated this property as a personal funding source for one child's discretionary expenses, while refusing to consider another child's serious medical needs." She looked at me for the first time. "Your son's situation is not the only factor here," she said. "But it does underscore the stakes." She turned back to the lawyers. "I find there is sufficient evidence of mismanagement and a substantial risk of harm to petitioner's interest if the current pattern continues. I am granting the petition. An order will issue appointing a receiver over the rental property. The receiver will collect all rents, pay the mortgage, taxes, and necessary expenses, and prepare a full accounting of income and expenditures for at least the past 3 years." My father made a small, strangled sound. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. "In addition," the judge continued, "the receiver is directed to hold petitioner's share of net income in a separate account, pending further order. Counsel may bring an appropriate motion if petitioner wishes to request that some of those funds be applied toward documented medical expenses for her child. I am not deciding that today, but I am preserving the option." She looked at both counsel tables. "There will also be an order prohibiting any new loans, refinances, or lines of credit secured by the property without court approval. If anyone violates that, they will answer to me." My ears rang a little, but my hand moved on its own, picking up the pen lying on Mark's legal pad. On the top sheet of my notebook, I wrote the words she had just said. Appointment of receiver. When the hearing ended and we stepped back into the hallway, the air felt different, thinner and sharper, like something had cracked open. I looked at the words in my notebook and underlined them once, the way I had underlined "due upon scheduling" on the hospital estimate. Within a few weeks, receiver turned from a word underlined in my notebook into a person whose letters showed up in real envelopes. The first one came by regular mail and certified mail both. The certified slip was still tucked to the corner when I opened it at my kitchen table. He introduced himself by name, listed the court case, and laid out his duties in plain language. He would collect all rents on the building, pay the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and necessary repairs, and hold any remaining net income for the benefit of the co-owners, subject to the judge's orders. There will be no more informal withdrawals or loans from the rent account, the letter said. All disbursements will be documented. I read that sentence twice. It was the first time I had seen anyone put informal and documented in the same paragraph about my family. A few days later, tenants started receiving their own notices. One forwarded hers to me with a confused message. "Is this legit?" she asked. "New account number for rent, some receiver guy. Says the court appointed him." "Yes," I wrote back. "It is legitimate. Same building, different manager." The receiver copied me on the letter he sent my parents. It outlined his appointment, gave the new rent account details, and instructed them not to collect rent directly or sign any new contracts tied to the property without his written consent. It was firm without being cruel, the way I had never been able to manage with them. When his preliminary report arrived, it came as an attachment to an email with a subject line that included the building's address. I opened it with my stomach in my throat. The report covered several years. Each month had its own row: rent collected, mortgage paid, property taxes, repairs, insurance, miscellaneous. At the far right was a column labeled distributions. Under my father's name, there were payments here and there, labeled as owner draw or reimbursement. Under mine, month after month, it said a single word: none. I scrolled and scrolled, past holidays and summers and the year of the wedding, and that word did not change. At the bottom, the receiver had totaled what he calculated as my share of net income that should have been available to me over that period. The number was not small. It was more than the $85,000 the hospital wanted. It was the sum of years of "you will be taken care of someday," finally written in actual digits. Mark called me that afternoon. "I've seen the report," he said. "So has the judge. The receiver is prepared to release a portion of your accrued share directly to the hospital if the court approves." "How much is a portion?" I asked. "Enough that, combined with what you've already paid under the temporary plan, it will bring your son's balance on the estimate down to zero," he said. "The rest stays in the receiver's account for future needs. We do not empty your bench just because we can." "Will there be another hearing?" I asked. "Not for this piece," he said. "We submitted a short request supported by the receiver's report and the hospital documentation. The judge signed an order this morning authorizing a direct lump sum payment for medical expenses. The receiver will wire it to the hospital's account. You'll get confirmation." A day later, the receiver scheduled a 3-way call with the hospital's billing office. I sat at my kitchen table again, Ethan building blocks on the rug, the oxygen machine humming behind him, when the call connected. "Thank you for speaking with us," the receiver said, formal but kind. "I am calling pursuant to a court order authorizing me to apply a portion of my co-owner's share of rental income to her son's outstanding medical estimate." The billing representative pulled up my file. "I see the estimate here," she said. $85,000 patient responsibility after insurance. We have a temporary payment plan noted. The court has authorized a lump sum payment on her behalf," he said. "We will be sending a wire from a receivership trust account. I will read you the account name and confirm the last 2 words of your receiving branch reference." He did. She repeated them and confirmed that they matched. He read the amount authorized under the order. I heard my own breath in my ears as he spoke, the number hitting the line like a gavel. "Once the funds arrive," she said, "we will apply them directly to her son's account and issue an updated statement. She should see a zero balance on the estimate after that. Please note in your file that the payment is coming from a court-appointed receiver," he said. "This is not a loan. It is application of her property income to her child's care." "I'll make that note," she said. "We appreciate the clarification. We will send written confirmation once the wire posts." When we hung up, I sat for a moment with my hand still on the phone. Ethan looked up. "Was that about the doctor?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That was about the doctor. People who were supposed to help us finally are." The pushback came right on schedule. My sister called first, not even saying hello. "Did you tell some court guy he can cancel my contractor?" she demanded. "He emailed me and said he would not approve the draw from the building for the kitchen work. He said all non-essential projects are on hold. Do you understand he is ruining my life upgrade?" "That is between you and the receiver," I said. "I do not tell him which expenses to approve." "You started this," she snapped. "If you had not dragged the building into your drama, I would have my new counters by now. I hope you enjoy your victory." "This is not a victory," I said. "It is a correction." She hung up without responding. An hour later, a long message appeared in the family group chat from my father. It started with, "I never thought my own daughter would do this to me," and went on for several dense paragraphs about strangers in his books, about how he had sacrificed everything, about my legal ambush. He implied the tenants were confused and scared, that the bank would think they were criminals, that I had shamed the family name all for one bill. Cousins and an aunt reacted with little icons but no words. My mother sent a single sad face. My sister added, "Thanks for the chaos," and nothing else. I did not defend myself point by point. I did not paste in screenshots or quote the judge. I typed one message, read it twice, and hit send. "The rental building will be managed according to the court's order now," I wrote. "My priority is Ethan's health and a clear, documented path for any money tied to my name. I will not discuss the receiver's decisions here." Then I muted the thread. The silence that followed belonged to them, not to me. A few days later, I stood at the hospital's billing window while Ethan colored in the waiting area. The clerk behind the glass pulled up our file, frowned for a second, then smiled. "It looks like we received a substantial wire from a court-managed account," she said. "Your son's procedure estimate is now paid in full. There is no remaining balance. You are clear to proceed with scheduling." She turned to a small printer and waited while it spat out a fresh page. She stamped it with a date, slid it into a clear sleeve, and handed it to me through the opening in the glass. "Here is your updated receipt," she said. "You'll see zero balance printed at the bottom." When the nurse handed me a new payment receipt with zero balance printed at the bottom, I slid it into the same binder that used to hold my sister's catering invoices. The binder felt heavier after I added that zero balance receipt, but in a different way. It was no longer just a record of what I had spent on other people. It finally contained proof of what someone had spent for my son. By early spring, the hospital smelled like coffee and disinfectant again, and I was back in a small exam room waiting for the pulmonologist to come in with the follow-up scan. Ethan swung his legs from the paper-covered table, a little less breathless than he used to be, chattering about a toy car he had seen in the gift shop. The doctor came in with the images pulled up on the screen. He pointed to shaded areas I had learned to recognize in the months since the procedure. "This looks good," he said. "The changes we were hoping to see are there. We'll keep monitoring, of course. But right now, I am pleased." "Are we past the worst?" I asked. "I never make promises," he said. "But today's scan is clean. That is a good place to be." When we left, I stopped at the billing window out of habit. The clerk pulled up our account, checked, and smiled. "No outstanding balance for the procedure or the follow-ups covered by the original plan," she said. "Everything tied to that estimate shows as paid in full." On the financial side, the receiver's world had settled into its own rhythm. Each month, he sent a report. Rent collected, mortgage and taxes paid, repairs approved, his fee, and at the bottom, my share of net income calculated in words and numbers. Instead of none, there was a line labeled distribution reserved for co-owner trust, with an amount that would have once felt abstract and now looked like concrete support. Mark introduced me to a colleague in his firm who did estate work. Sitting in another small office, this one with a plant in the corner and a framed picture of a lake, I listened as she explained what a simple trust agreement could do. "You can instruct that distributions from the receiver be paid into a dedicated account for your son," she said. "Medical expenses now, education later. You can name a trustee who is not a relative, someone with a fiduciary duty to follow the document, not family pressure." "A trustee," I repeated. Another new word. "We will keep the words short and the terms clear," she said. "You will be the one making the decisions now. On paper, instead of relying on someone else's memory." We drafted the trust over a week. It had a plain name, just Ethan's name, and the words, Health and Education Trust. The trustee was an individual from the same firm, with a duty to send me regular statements and to apply funds only to categories spelled out in the document. We gave the receiver written instructions to send my share of the rental income there, not to any personal account. When I signed the trust agreement at a notary appointment in a quiet corner of the bank, the clerk watched me sign and stamped the pages. "This is for your son?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "This is for my son." Months after the first hearing, we were back at the courthouse for a brief status conference on the receivership. It was the opposite of the first day. Quick, procedural. The receiver reported that tenants were paying into the new account. The mortgage and taxes were up to date. No unauthorized loans had been taken, and distributions were being held or sent to the trust as ordered. The judge glanced through his summary and nodded. "Receivership to continue under existing terms," she said. "Next review in several months unless a party requests earlier intervention." Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt the same as it had that first day: stale coffee. Low voices, but my shoulders were different. I was putting my notebook back into my bag when my father spoke my name from behind me. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I turned. He looked older than he had in the hospital lounge. Not dramatically, just like someone who had spent a year sleeping badly. "1 minute," I said. He glanced at the courtroom door. "I never thought it would go this far," he said. "Lawyers, receivers, judges telling us what we can do with our own building." "Our building," I said. I did not correct the rest. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I am glad he is better," he said, almost grudgingly. "I am glad that money was there. I just wish it didn't have to come with all of this." "That money was always there," I said. "It just was not being counted in my direction." He shifted. "Now that he's okay," he said, "maybe we can ask the court to give the building back. End this receivership nonsense. Let things go back to normal. I can do monthly updates, if that's what you want." We can keep it in the family." "No," I said. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. He frowned. "No, normal for me now is written reports, court orders, and a neutral person managing the building." I said, "Normal is my share going into a trust that has rules and a trustee who is not related to me. Normal is knowing that if my son needs something, there is a structure to support him that does not depend on whether you feel generous that month." I said I was sorry, he said. "I never meant for you to feel like we chose your sister over him." "You did," I said. "But this isn't about how I feel anymore. It's about what is on paper. You can ask your lawyer to petition the court to end the receivership. I will not be joining you." "So you are choosing the court over your own father," he said. "I am choosing my son over your comfort," I said. "And I am choosing not to ever sit at a kitchen table again wondering if you will decide to keep your word." He shook his head, a little sadly, like I was the one throwing something away. "You've changed," he said. "I learned what my name on a deed actually means," I said. "That is not the same as changing." We stood there in the hallway, the weight of old habits pressing in. For a second, I thought he might reach out, but he just adjusted his jacket and walked past me toward the elevators. On the drive home, I took the route that passed the rental property. It had fresh paint now. The receiver had approved work on the exterior because it extended the life of the building. Tenants came and went, carrying groceries and laundry baskets, just like they had before. From the sidewalk, nothing looked different. The difference was in the invisible lines, where the rent went when it cleared, whose account it entered, which documents governed how it left. It was no longer a vague promise of someday or a story my parents told to calm me down when I worried about money. It was an asset with paperwork and protections, something my son could rely on even if family loyalty failed. At a red light, I glanced at the front seat where my binder sat. Hospital receipts, court orders, the trust agreement, monthly statements with my share listed in black and white. I had once paid for my sister's wedding on the strength of their word. Now, I let the receiver pay for my son's life on the strength of the courts.